Eleanor could have simply hired a landscaper and been done with it. That would have been the easy solution. But easy wasn't nearly as satisfying as what she had in mind. Monday morning, she called an emergency meeting with her chief of staff, city attorney, and the director of community development. "I need everything we have on the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association," she announced as her puzzled team assembled in her office. "Specifically, I want to know about their legal standing, tax status, and any interactions they've had with city departments over the past 5 years." By lunchtime, her desk was covered with fascinating discoveries. The Oak Ridge HOA had been operating under bylaws that hadn't been properly updated since 1997. Their tax-exempt status paperwork showed several concerning irregularities. Most interestingly, they'd been enforcing certain regulations that directly contradicted the city's recently passed sustainability ordinances. According to City Ordinance 47B, which I believe I signed myself last year, Eleanor mused to her team, tapping a document, natural landscaping and native plant cultivation are not only permitted but encouraged in all residential zones to support water conservation and local wildlife. Her city attorney raised an eyebrow. "So your unkempt yard could actually be reclassified as a natural habitat garden under city code?" "Exactly," Eleanor smiled. "And Gerald's chemically treated, water-intensive perfect lawn might actually be the one in violation of city law, which supersedes HOA regulations." But Eleanor had no interest in a petty tit-for-tat with her neighbor. Instead, she drafted a comprehensive proposal, the Pinecrest Community Integration Initiative, designed to harmonize HOA regulations with city ordinances, promote sustainable neighborhood practices, and create new communication channels between neighborhood associations and city government. "We'll need a pilot neighborhood," she told her enthusiastic team. "I'm thinking Oak Ridge would be perfect." As she left City Hall that evening, Eleanor made one more call to Channel 5 News, whose Greening the City segment was always looking for good stories about local environmental initiatives. The Pinecrest Community Center hadn't been this packed since the contentious debate over the new high school location. Local news cameras lined the back wall, and nearly every seat was filled, with a conspicuously large turnout from the Oak Ridge neighborhood. Gerald sat front and center, arms crossed, flanked by his HOA board members in matching polo shirts embroidered with the Oak Ridge logo. Eleanor had to admire their commitment to branding, if nothing else. "Citizens of Pinecrest," Eleanor began, comfortable at the podium after years of public speaking, "today marks an exciting new chapter in our community's development." She outlined the new Community Integration Initiative with the polished expertise of someone who'd navigated far more complex political waters than a neighborhood spat. The proposal included tax incentives for HOAs that adopted sustainable practices, a streamlined system for resolving conflicts between city and HOA regulations, and, most popular with the crowd, a new mobile app where residents could report both HOA and city issues with a single click. And to demonstrate our commitment, Eleanor continued, ticking to a slide showing her own backyard. "The city is offering matching grants for converting traditional lawns to natural habitat gardens, like this demonstration project I've personally started at my home in Oak Ridge." The picture showed her previously unkempt yard transformed into an artful arrangement of native wildflowers, ornamental grasses, and a charming stone path, all installed by the city's Parks Department over the weekend as a model environmental project. "This garden uses 70% less water than a traditional lawn," Eleanor explained enthusiastically, "provides essential habitat for pollinators, and," she paused for effect, making direct eye contact with Gerald, "is fully compliant with both city environmental ordinances and, as I've confirmed with legal counsel, HOA aesthetic requirements when properly registered as an environmental showcase property." Gerald's face was a study in conflicted emotions. The crowd, however, was clearly won over, especially when Eleanor announced that the first 50 homeowners to sign up for yard conversion would receive a commemorative plaque and feature on the city's new sustainability website. As questions began, a local reporter stood up. "Mayor Simmons, Some might see this initiative as a response to your own recent citation by the Oak Ridge HOA. Would you care to comment? Eleanor smiled. Sometimes the best policy ideas come from personal experience. This initiative isn't about any single citation. It's about creating harmony between different levels of community governance. And speaking of harmony, she added, I'd like to invite Gerald Thompson, Oak Ridge HOA president, to co-chair our pilot committee. All eyes turned to Gerald, trapped by both the spotlight and social pressure. With cameras rolling, he had no choice but to stand and accept with a tight smile, even as he whispered to Eleanor as they shook hands. Well played, Madam Mayor. Well played indeed. 6 months later, Eleanor hosted the first annual Pennycrest Neighborhood Summit in her backyard, now a flourishing wildflower meadow that had been featured in suburban living magazines, reinventing the American lawn issue. Representatives from all 12 of the city's HOAs mingled with city officials, sipping lemonade and sharing success stories. The Community Integration Initiative had expanded citywide, with over 200 homes now sporting natural habitat gardens and solar installations. Gerald, surprisingly, had thrown himself into his role as co-chair with unexpected enthusiasm. His banking background made him perfect for managing the grant program, and his attention to detail had proven invaluable in rewriting outdated HOA regulations to align with city ordinances. Your native plant identification tags are crooked, Gerald noted as he approached Eleanor by the refreshment table, though his tone was teasing rather than critical. Eleanor laughed. Some violations are worth living with. How are the workshops coming along? Gerald's HOA leadership in the 21st century workshops had become unexpectedly popular, drawing participants from neighboring cities. We're booked through December, he admitted with pride. Turns out there's huge demand for learning how to enforce standards without being a bureaucratic nightmare, Eleanor suggested. I was going to say inflexible, Gerald replied with a half smile, but point taken. As the sun set over the gathering, Channel 5 News arrived for a follow-up segment. The reporter asked Eleanor and Gerald to stand together beside a particularly vibrant patch of black-eyed Susans for the camera. So, Mayor Simmons, looking back, are you grateful that Mr. Thompson reported your yard to the HOA? The reporter asked with a knowing smile. Eleanor and Gerald exchanged glances before she answered. Let's just say that sometimes the most productive civic relationships begin with a strongly worded notice on your front door. Later, after the guests had departed, Eleanor found Gerald helping with cleanup, carefully separating recyclables from compostables. You know, he said thoughtfully, my term as HOA president ends next month. Planning your retirement? Eleanor asked, gathering empty glasses. Gerald shook his head. Actually, I was thinking of running for city council. Someone needs to keep the mayor's office in check after all. Eleanor laughed louder than she had in months. Now that would make for an interesting election season. Consider it my formal notice, Gerald replied with his first genuine smile in their entire neighborly relationship. As they finished cleaning up under the emerging stars, Eleanor reflected that politics, whether at City Hall or just across property lines, was always about transformation. Sometimes it took a ridiculous yellow violation notice to spark meaningful change, and sometimes your biggest critic could become your most valuable ally. The garden between their homes had blossomed, and so improbably had mutual respect. Eleanor Simmons had been the mayor of Pennycrest for nearly 2 years when the ridiculous yellow slip appeared on her front door. After 16 straight hours of emergency meetings, dealing with a water main break that had flooded the historic district, Eleanor trudged up her driveway at 11 p.m. to find the official notice from the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, practically glowing in the porch light. Notice of violation. Landscaping Standards Section 4.13. It read in officious bold type. The complaint detailed her egregiously unkempt lawn, hazardously overgrown hedges, and unsightly collection of campaign signs, still visible from the street 3 months after her successful re-election. At the bottom was the flourishing signature of Gerald Thompson, HOA president, complete with an embossed gold seal he'd apparently purchased for such occasions, and her next-door neighbor for the past 5 years. Eleanor crumpled the notice, then immediately smoothed it out and read it again. Through her kitchen window, she could see Gerald's silhouette moving around his perfectly lit home. Was he actually watching for her reaction? She squinted and could have sworn she saw the edge of a curtain fall back into place. The irony was almost laughable. While she'd spent the day authorizing emergency expenditures and coordinating with FEMA representatives, Gerald had taken time out of his retired banker's schedule to measure her grass with what she imagined was a very official-looking ruler. Diminishing neighborhood aesthetic standards, she read aloud to her cat, Mr. Chairman, who blinked slowly in solidarity. "Well, Mr. Chairman, it seems we've committed a serious offense against suburban tranquility." She dropped her briefcase and kicked off her heels. The real kicker wasn't just the citation. It was that Gerald had her personal cell number and had used it just last month to ask about the city's position on food trucks. Yet somehow, he couldn't manage a simple text about her lawn before escalating to formal HOA action. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting," she told Mr. Chairman, who was already plotting his own violation of the no cats on the kitchen counter ordinance. At precisely 7:30 a.m., the earliest hour permitted for lawn maintenance according to those same HOA regulations, Eleanor fired up her rarely used electric lawn mower. The sputtering start echoed across the morning quiet of Oak Ridge Estates. She smiled when she saw Gerald's bedroom curtains twitch. By 7:45, Gerald was outside inspecting his own immaculate roses, pruning shears in hand, casting not-so-subtle glances her way. Eleanor waited until she'd made 3 conspicuously messy passes with the mower before cutting the engine and strolling to the property line. "Morning, Gerald," she called with mayoral cheerfulness, wiping theatrical sweat from her brow. "Beautiful day for addressing egregious landscaping violations, isn't it?" Gerald straightened up, his property of Oak Ridge Golf Club cap perfectly positioned on his head. "Eleanor," he nodded stiffly, "I see you received the notice." "Hard to miss," she replied, pulling the crumpled yellow paper from the pocket of her old college sweatshirt, an intentional contrast to her usual business attire. "I'm curious, though. Did my azaleas commit a felony or just a misdemeanor? I want to make sure I'm filing the right paperwork." Gerald's ears reddened. "The HOA covenant is very clear about—" "I know all about covenants, Gerald," she interrupted with the same voice she used to silence argumentative council members. "I just wonder why my next-door neighbor couldn't mention my lawn was bothering him before involving the full regulatory authority of the almighty HOA." "It's not personal," Gerald insisted, clutching his pruning shears a bit tighter. "As HOA president, I must uphold standards without favoritism. Your position as mayor doesn't exempt you from neighborhood regulations." "Interesting perspective." Eleanor nodded, mentally calculating how many city ordinances Gerald's property might be violating. "Tell me, does your presidential duty also prevent you from lending me that hedge trimmer this weekend, or would that constitute HOA corruption?" Gerald's face cycled through several interesting shades of purple before he muttered something about procedure and retreated to his garage, leaving Eleanor smiling on the property line. Across the street, Eleanor noticed Mrs. Abernathy on her porch, slowly clapping in silent approval. Apparently, she wasn't the only one who found Gerald's HOA tyranny tiresome.